Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
This is a reading from Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 through 24. This is how the birth of Jesus the Messiah came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." All of this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet, "The virgin shall conceive and give birth to a son, and they shall call him Emmanuel," which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife.
So throughout this month, we've been looking at all the stories of the angel's visitations to the principal characters of the Christmas story. And we started with Gospel of Luke, in which Gabriel, the angel, the archangel, visits first Zechariah and then Mary. But today we're going to take a brief break from Luke's story to go over to Matthew's gospel. Because Matthew begins the story not with Mary or Zechariah, but with Joseph. An angel comes and visits Joseph, awakens him in a dream, and tells him of the divine plan that he has. And in some ways, this is kind of a strange way to start the story of Jesus' birth, because Joseph, when you think about it, he doesn't have a big role. I mean, Mary's the one who has to bear the child. Mary's the one who has to give birth. What role does Joseph, guys, what role do we play in the birthing process in general anyways, right? But for Matthew, it's terribly important. Because for Matthew, what he is very concerned about as he begins to tell the story of Jesus' birth, he's very concerned with Jesus' lineage. Look at the way he starts Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. He says, "This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." And then for the next 17 verses, he just lays it out all the way from Abraham to David, and then from David to the exile, and then from the exile all the way down to Joseph. If Joseph is not part of this chain, then Jesus is not descended from the house and lineage of David. For that matter, they would have never gone to the city of Bethlehem. Luke's gospel records it this way. We all know the story in Luke's gospel. It says, "And so they went up to Bethlehem because he was descended from the house and lineage of David." So a lot of prophecy is relying on Joseph's yes in this moment. There's a lot riding on him agreeing to this plan that the angel is informing him about. But it's even bigger than that. Because for Joseph, I mean, he's not just a name in a genealogy. He's being asked to become father to this child. I mean, he's the one who's going to protect Jesus. When Herod makes the decision that he's going to kill all the children under the age of 2, it's Joseph who has to move the family safely down to Egypt so that they can escape that hatred, that slaughter. And then he has to be the one to move them back to Nazareth. And he would provide Jesus a home, a trade, a skill. He would be the one who would teach him to be a carpenter. Before Jesus would ever know his true identity, that he's God's son, First, he has to lean on what it means to be loved by a human father. And Joseph his love is the one on which Jesus will lean as he continues to grow and develop. And my point is that Joseph's decision isn't just whether or not he's going to marry Mary. His decision is whether or not he's going to adopt and claim Jesus as his child. I don't know if you ever thought about it that way before, but the reality is when God brought his son into the world, he was brought into the world through a process of adoption. Not that God didn't care about Jesus, not that God was abandoning Jesus. It's more that God chose to entrust his son into the care of earthly human beings like you and I. And Joseph has this crucial decision. He knows he loves Mary, but can his love include a child that is not his? I mean, unlike Mary, Jesus will have no genetic material from Joseph. And also, unlike Mary, Joseph doesn't get this opportunity to carry the child, to feel it growing in his womb, to have that connection that all mothers have with infants. He has to choose. Can I love a child that is not mine? And at least initially, Joseph's choice is no. His plan is to quietly put Mary aside. When Jamelin and I lived in Haiti, one of the places that we invested a lot of our time and energy was an orphanage in the village of Fondois where we lived. You can see pictures of, that's a few years later, you can see Margaret in the mix of all the orphanage kids. So Jamelin and I lived at this didn't live at the orphanage. We lived a few minutes away from the orphanage. And in the orphanage, there are about 40 or 50 children. I know when I say that word orphanage, you get this mental image of what an orphan is, that an orphan is someone without a mother or father. But that's not true of all these children. Some of the children don't have mothers and fathers, but more often they all have family, an uncle, an aunt, a grandparent, some kind of extended family that often in the summers they would return home to and spend a little time of vacation. Most of these children were what we call economic orphans. Their families simply couldn't provide for them, couldn't feed them, couldn't send them to school. And they were faced with this terrible choice of realizing that since they couldn't provide for their children, they had to give their children up. And they would hand the children over to the sisters who ran the orphanage in order to take care of them and give them food, clothing, shelter, and school. And so the reality is that in this orphanage, most of these children will not be adopted. That's not the point of the Fondois orphanage. It's less an orphanage in that way and more like a boarding school in a way. That these children lived and grew up in this orphanage, 40, 50 children. That became their family. And the older children look after the younger children, and they all share together in the daily tasks of cooking and cleaning and caring for, that's how they lived. This was their family, and they leaned on each other to survive. For Jamelin and I, we grew to love these children because they didn't have a parent among them. They had the sisters and they had other caregivers that would take care of them and clean their clothes and make sure they got fed, but they didn't have a parent in their home. And so Jamelin and I did our best to try to fill that role to some degree. We would go down and play silly games with the little ones, or sometimes we would just hold them in our laps and tend their boo-boos when they fell and cried. We'd do homework with the elementary kids, play hide and seek. We would, with the older kids, we didn't play as much. We just sit on their beds and listen to the gossip, of middle school, high school, who likes who, and so forth. And sometimes if we did that well enough, then they would entrust us with their dreams of, here's what we want to do someday. Here's what we want to study. We weren't their parents, but we tried our best to be a parental role, to be someone that they could trust and someone that they knew loved them. And at some point, we did talk about adoption. In this picture that's going across, we look so young there, don't we? But that's Andu, Audrey, and Naika. And Andu and Audrey were some of the rare examples of kids that were being adopted by a woman in North Carolina was adopting Andu and Audrey. But Naika was someone who kind of tugged on our hearts. We felt kind of a special bond with her, and we talked about what would it be like to adopt this child as our own. And honestly, I was the one who was kind of like, whoa, I don't know if I'm ready for that. And I had a lot of rational reasons behind that, honestly. For one, there was the finances. I didn't know how we'd pay for it. We were living in Haiti off the donations and support of others, and I had no idea what it would cost and how we'd financially do it. Jamelyn said, we'll raise the money. I said, I know. And then there was the fact that we were newlywed. We'd only been married, 7 months when we moved down to Haiti, and it was like, we're still figuring each other out. I don't know how to throw kids in that mix. And then the fact that if we adopted Naika, she was already 5 or 6, and by the time we would have finalized the adoption, she would have been much older, and we didn't know anything about parenting, and it's one thing to jump into the deep end of the pool, versus kind of easing your way in. And then I would say, but how can we just choose one out of all these 50 kids? I mean, how do we choose just one? What kind of message does that send to all the rest of them? And I had lots of reasons, but underneath all those reasons, perhaps you can hear that the emotion was really fear. That I knew that this was a life-changing decision, and I wasn't ready for it. And I wonder if Joseph felt some of that same fear. I mean, what God was asking him to do, he had to be afraid. And so I find it significant that the very first words that the angel speaks to Joseph are, do not be afraid. Don't be afraid to claim this child as your own. I know you love Mary. Don't be afraid to open that love up and include one more. Don't be afraid. Jamelyn and I never did make the choice to adopt, but in some ways I don't regret that decision, because in some ways we ended up adopting all the children at the Fondwa Orphanage. And Naika, that little girl, is now a teenager, almost finished with school, and she's grown into this amazing, beautiful young woman that is a great caretaker and role model to all the other children in the orphanage. And she's blossomed, so she's done great, and we're so proud of her. And in the midst of it, the children that we've seen grow up over these 15, 20 years, now they've been replaced by other children coming into the orphanage, and we do our best to be a source of friendship and love and support to all those children. So it's all worked out the way it should have, but I still, we all have these moments, right, in our adult life where we ask the what if question. Like, what if, our life had gone a different direction? And that's one of the what ifs for us. And because of that experience and because of our relationship with the orphanage, I'm always in awe of those who do make that decision, of those who take that risk of opening their hearts to embrace another child. And I have some good friends who are in our church, Brad and Leslie Manbeck. I've known them for 10 years now. And right after the Haiti earthquake, they approached me and said, we are feeling called to adopt a child into our home. And here's their story.
My name is Brad Manbeck. It's my wife, Leslie. And we have 3 kids. Katie is a senior in high school. She's 17, will be 18 in January. And Eli is a freshman in high school, just turned 15. And then Jorson is a 6th grader, and he turned 12 in August.
Our adoption story started within weeks of the earthquake in Haiti. We were sitting in our old Sunday school class, and I remember thinking, as a mom, I can't imagine, what do you do? And I heard, bring them home. I just kind of like, you're not going to believe this, but I think we're supposed to adopt a child from Haiti. And he's just like, oh. And a couple hours later, he's like, you know what? I think we're supposed to adopt a child from Haiti too.
So, and we were at a point from a family perspective where we were done having kids.
We were done. We had the boy, the girl. We had the perfect little family. Why do we need to mess that up?
So there were a lot of reservations about what it meant to adopt. bringing home somebody of a different race, bringing home, somebody that we didn't know health-wise. There just were a lot of, really wasn't the right thing for us to do. We were just moved. Initially part of the reservation was where we just moved by this natural disaster. But the interesting thing is the feeling, it didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. When we got matched and we got information about Jorson, we got the first set of photos, it's overwhelming.
It was exciting. It wasn't he could be our son. That's our son.
Right.
So we accepted the match, the placement, and then the waiting really started.
Yeah. So from the time we were matched until the first time we met him was probably 7 or 8 months.
Probably.
Yeah. And then it was probably another 7 or 8 months after that.
It was almost a year from the
the
time we met him and then we left, and it was almost a year before we were able. Everything was finalized in Haiti before we could go back. But we ended up leaving Haiti on his birthday.
And the way that the U.S. citizenship works, the day you land is the day you become a U.S. citizen. So he made it to the United States on his birthday and got his U.S. citizenship on his 6th birthday as well. For me, I think the biggest blessing in adopting is it gave us an opportunity to start to see life through his eyes. And it was a completely different perspective. Even though we have 2 biological kids and they're older and they've been through a lot of the same kinds of things, it's just different. He's seeing things for the first time, experiencing things for the first time. So it's been a great reminder of how cool life can be.
But it took a while for me, being completely honest, for that love to become genuine.
Because there are a lot of challenges that come with an international, biracial kiddo that has, he's got issues that our other kid didn't have. So there are still challenges. Every day we're like, we've never had to say these things before.
Aaron, it's reinforced the concept that it's not about blood, it's not about biology, having biological kids to make a family, and that there's love to go around, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter your hair. Doesn't matter where you came from. He's part of our family now, and that can be true for anybody in any situation.
It doesn't matter. Your differences don't matter. It's how you treat each other. It's how you interact with each other. It's the love and respect that you show each other. That's what a family is.
So some parts of the video that we had to cut, but you guys didn't see. Brad was saying, he meets Tuesday morning with a men's group, and they always said, Brad would say to his group, it'd be easy if God just told us what to do. If God just told us and made it plain to do it. And yet, in that moment came when there's this choice of adoption, he realized he felt like God was telling them exactly what to do. And yet it was still hard to kind of make that choice and just do what God was asking you to lay aside the fear, the reservations, and just embrace it. And I also liked the part that we ended up having to cut, but Leslie said, she said it took a while, but she remembered the first moment when the mama bear came out, when she, for Jorson, when she kind of jumped in protecting, she says, and then she knew it's real, it's there, that love is there. And I also love how they said, not just when they received the pictures, not just this could be our son, but that's him. That's our son. A friend of mine also adopted a child from Russia. And I remember the story he told. He said, when my wife and I went over to Russia to meet our child for the first time, and we got to hold him for about 5 minutes. And after we got to hold him for a little bit and spend a little time, then the caretakers took him away, and the director of the orphanage came to us and said, "So, what do you think? Do you like him?" And kind of a strange question. But he said their response was immediate. "No, we love him. Not just we like him, we love him." And to me, that's the essence of adoption. It's opening your heart to love one more person in this world. It's opening up the picture that you have of your family or your life in order to include someone else. And it strikes me that the choice that was given to Joseph is the same choice God gives to each of us as well. Will we adopt? Will we open our hearts to include someone else in this world? Because this world is full of problems, but behind every problem is a person waiting for adoption, waiting for someone to include them in their care and their love. So will you adopt? It might be that person on your street whose family doesn't live close or who's lost a loved one during the holidays. Will you adopt them this Christmas season and include them in your love, invite them over for dinner, share with them your hospitality? It might be a child that you know who seems to struggle in the world, who needs a lot of care and attention. Will you adopt them as your own and give them that extra care and attention that they need? It might be a member of this church, someone who's new, who's still feeling their way out and doesn't know all the lingo and activities. And will you adopt them and help them, kind of make connections and form friendships here? There are people everywhere waiting for adoption. And God is asking us, can you open up your heart? Can you include someone else? And I want to be clear, when you adopt someone, it involves laying down the picture that you had for your life. That's what Joseph had to do. He had to lay down the picture he had in order to embrace a new picture that God gave him. Adoption is difficult work. I mean, for starters, you can't adopt everyone. Same way Jamel and I couldn't adopt 50 children. You can't adopt every person, every place, every problem in the world. You have to choose, or really you have to allow those people and problems to choose you. And when you make that choice to adopt, if you do it right, it'll wreck your life, it'll wreck your heart, because it'll open you up to the possibility of hurt and pain. But it also opens you up to the possibility of joy and blessing that you didn't even realize you could have. But let me flip this around, because I've been asking you, can you adopt? But let me flip this around and just ask the question, have you ever had the experience of being adopted? Have you ever had the experience of a coach or mentor or teacher or group of friends who have adopted and included you? Not because of any biological bonds, not because of any obligation, but just have you ever known someone who's reached out and included you and claimed you as their own? Those are powerful experiences when they happen. In our own family, I say all the time we have an adopted grandmother. And when I use that word adopted, I'm not at all discounting the word that follows, grandmother. Her name is Ruth Ann. When we were serving, when our children were born, Jamlin was serving at Greensburg United Methodist Church. And we were brand new pastors in her church and my church, and Ruth Ann was a member of Greensburg, and so she came to Jamlin one day when she was pregnant and said, when your child's born and you come back from maternity leave, I know it's tough to find childcare. I'll watch your daughter one day a week. We said, oh, great, free childcare. We didn't even do a background check. We just said, sure, here's our daughter, What we didn't know is that Ruth Ann's husband had died about a year before, and that they didn't have children or grandchildren. And so we didn't even know this path that we were getting on. But before you knew it, one day became 2 days a week, became whenever we needed the help. And Ruth Ann became part of our family. She'd come to birthdays and Christmases and Thanksgiving. And I remember by the time our son was born, 2.5 years later, Ruth Ann came to the hospital and she was wearing a pin that said something like, ask me about my new grandson, She was, from day one, she's been a grandmother to our children, and she's been part of our family. And so my point is that adopted relationships are no less meaningful and powerful than biological ones. In fact, they may be even more powerful because they are chosen instead of just given. And there is incredible grace in knowing that you have been chosen and knowing that someone chose to adopt and include you. And in some ways, this is what the Christmas story is about. It's not just about Joseph choosing to adopt Jesus. It's about God choosing to adopt us. This is how Paul describes the moment when Jesus is born. He says, when the fullness of time had come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, that we might receive adoption as children. And because you are children, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a child. And if a child, then also an heir through God. God looked at you. God looked at me and said, I'm going to include you in my family. And he sent his son in order to kind of facilitate that process of adoption, in order that that son's spirit might enter into us. And he's not some distant father anymore, but he is Abba, the Aramaic word for daddy. That's the relationship we get with God because God chose to adopt us and include us in his love and his grace and his care. How great is that? So all month long, we've had these ornaments out on the tree. And the ornaments all have a single word on them, and today's word is love. And as you go out, I hope you take an ornament and you can do one of two things with it. One is if you are needing just that reminder that you are loved this Christmas season, that God chose you and adopted you through his son. Take that ornament of love, put it on your tree, put it somewhere where it'll remind you of how much God loves you. But it might also be that you know someone who needs that message of love this Christmas. And so we ask you to take an ornament and give it to them. And it may be that as you include that person, it might be a member of your family that you struggle sometimes to get along with. It might be a coworker that you know doesn't have any family nearby. It might be a random act of kindness you do for someone on the street or someone in the store who just looks like they're having a bad day. It might be a gift you make to Mission Guatemala, to children on the other side of the world to say that they are loved, adopted, and included, not just in God's care, but in yours as well. But whenever you make that choice to expand the circle of your love, to include one more person in your family and in your life, I hope you know you're not just acting like Joseph did. You're acting like God acts. You're living out the divine image within you. And that's how we all, ordinary people, get to carry this extraordinary message of grace and love. And we become one of God's many angels among us.